everyone, this is Amanda Borschel-Dan.
And I'm Jessica Steinberg,
your host for Times Will Tell,
a weekly podcast from the Times of Israel.
Hi everyone, I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan, and this week on Times Will Tell, we're speaking with Mayim Bialik, who has just released her filmmaking debut, As They Made Us. Most people know Mayim from her performance as neuroscientist Amy on The Big Bang Theory, or from her work as a child on the sitcom Blossom that I personally grew up with. But As They Made Us is quite the departure. It's a really tough look at tense family relations as the father in the family's life is winding to a close. I personally found it just shattering. I cried. It touched me. All the emotions. Mayim wrote and directed As They Made Us, and it stars Dustin Hoffman as the dying father, Candice Bergen as the overbearing mother, Simon Helberg as the estranged older brother, and Dianna Agron plays the anchor of the family, Jewish journalist Abigail. Let's hear a bit of the trailer for As They Made Us now before we speak with Mayim.
Okay, final hugs for Dad. Hugs, hugs.
Oh, look at that, it's your mom. Nope.
God, relentless.
Hey, bye. Good luck with that.
Mom.
Wait till you hear this one.
Dad fell again. He's on the floor and can't get up.
What?
Well, he's comfortable.
Trying to sit down and I missed it. Abby, my Abby. You know me better than anybody. You always have. You know me better than your mother.
Call the caregiver agency. I gotta fire another one.
Oh, no, Mom. What did he do?
He was giving your father marijuana in the form of cute little bears.
Mom, he was one of the good ones.
Mayim, thank you so much for joining me. Where am I finding you today?
I'm actually in my podcast studio in Los Angeles. And yeah, that's it. I'm not working. I'm not working today on Jeopardy or the other things that I normally work on. So I'm happy to be talking to you. And I'm in, Los Angeles, California.
Fantastic. You know, you and I are the same age. And so I feel like in a way I've grown up watching you grow up. And I think for most of my life, it's been Blossom and Beaches, of course. And, you know, as an adult, The Big Bang Theory. But I realized when I was reading up on you that you were in probably my most favorite show ever that I've always mentioned to my children. And I've never rewatched since being an adult. And that's Beauty and the Beast. Do you remember anything of that?
Yes, that was my first TV job that I ever had in the industry. I had just started acting, pretty recently. It was very exciting. It was filmed at the same studios where we ended up filming Blossom a couple years later. So it was just a really neat, it was the same producing company. So that was actually a very nice kind of tie-in, as it were, in my life. And I just had a couple lines. I played one of the kids who lived underground. Linda Hamilton was in it, and Ron Perlman. It was great. And the effects were really good. I mean, for the time, I don't know if they hold up, but yes, Beauty and the Beast. I do remember it well. I must have done that. Yeah, it was 1987.
And when I told my kids about it and just explaining the premise of the program, they just looked at me like I'd fallen off the moon. Just the weirdest thing. So there's this half man, half beast, but he's really sexy. And I think I kind of was in love with him at the same time. So when you met him in real life, with the costume and all that, did he actually look as gorgeous as he appeared on screen?
He was a very handsome man. You are correct there. And yes, I bet my kids would also think I'm nuts if I told them the story.
Yeah. And even now you're in a program that sounds a little crazy if you just talk about the premise. And that's, of course, Call Me Kat. And what is this program?
We just finished our second season. We're a Fox show, and it's about a woman who's has a change of life and decides to use the money that her parents had set aside for her to get married to open a cat cafe. And these are actual cafes that exist where you go and it's a normal cafe where you get coffee and pastries and things like that. But there are cats there that you can pet and hang out with. And many of them, the cats are up for adoption. So it's also kind of a rescue shelter. And so we have this show that we just finished our second season, and it revolves around this quirky woman and her cat cafe and the people that she works with and the people she interacts with. And, we're a situation comedy, and we don't know if we'll be doing a third season, but we sure have had a good time doing the first two.
So, of course, in Israel, where cats are so ubiquitous, we just call that a cafe.
That's right. Exactly.
And then the other thing that your other full-time gig is, of course, Jeopardy, which I grew up watching and you stepped into recently. And I was reading that you're having some kind of a scandal about your wardrobe not changing enough for the likes of the viewers, something like that.
Well, I try not to follow those things, so I don't know if it's my scandal or just, kind of stuff that gets put out there on the internet. I try not to follow that stuff too much. I do know that, we try and wear something different. We try and wear something different every episode, and we do, which, male hosts do as well. I guess with women, it's more noticeable. But yeah, we definitely, we mix it up to the best of our ability, but there may be repeats. That's true.
So it's basically what is superfluous for 500, please? Okay, I won't be so corny. I can't help it though. And you also have a podcast, Mayim Bialik's Breakdown with Jonathan Cohen. And tell us a little bit about that too.
Yeah, Jonathan and I started that podcast when the pandemic started, as a person who grew up living with mental illness and having my own challenges, really my whole life. I realized that, boy, a global pandemic will sure, get your anxiety spiked up and lots of other things. And especially a lot of us had, anticipatory anxiety. We didn't know what was going to happen. And a lot of us, are still feeling that. So we started this podcast to try and really just give people a bit of a basic vocabulary about what mental health is and what it can look like and what's the difference between an anxiety attack and a panic attack and what are the different kinds of depression. And we have people on who are either experts in the field or experts in their own mental health. We just released our Dustin Hoffman episode, which was pretty incredible. He stars in the movie that I wrote and directed, which just came out. And he sat down with us and, we've had some pretty incredible guests and interviews, and it's been very rewarding, to talk about what works for people and what doesn't work for people. We're not giving solutions or just sort of exploring things that Jonathan and I have tried, and some things have worked and some things haven't, and it's been a real pleasure.
I actually did listen to and watch the Dustin Hoffman episode, and I found it just fascinating. So listeners, check out Mayim Bialik's Breakdown. Okay, let's talk briefly about what it's like being a practicing Jew in Hollywood. I don't know what you label yourself or if you label yourself, but at this point, would you say you keep Shabbat or what would be your level of practice?
Yeah, I call myself observant-ish. And, I tend to be a halachically organized Jew in terms of the holidays and the way that I practice them. What it's like is if you're a halachically organized Jew, the fall is kind of a wash. It's a very, very difficult calendar in an industry that is very difficult to navigate around. So that's sort of one of the biggest challenges. Our show tapes on Tuesday nights, not Friday nights, which is really nice and obviously preferable for those of us who like to be home for Shabbat. We're a family with, I have a 13 and a 16-year-old. So we had, 2 bar mitzvahs, one during COVID. And we go to Israel for, we go about every other year. I've been to Israel about since I'm 16. And obviously COVID threw a wrench in that. So my younger son is waiting for his Israel bar mitzvah trip, even though his bar mitzvah was last fall. So we are Zionists. We are descendants of Mayim Bialik. So that's a big part of our life as well.
Just for our listeners, I want to explain who he is. He's basically the father goose of Israel and much more. But the first foundational tunes that any Israeli child will hear are based on the words of Mayim Bialik.
Yeah, and he was a Yiddish speaker who wrote in Hebrew also. So it was a big part of kind of the Zionist the emphasis on the importance of Zionism in particular in Haaretz. So anyway, that's I tend to not have as many problems with food as meat or dairy eaters might if they were kosher. I'm a vegan, and so that makes a lot of my life simpler. And I definitely meet people who don't know a lot about Judaism or observant Judaism, both Jews and non-Jews alike. And also I meet a lot of people who are very interested in, the way that I choose to practice and study and also raise my kids.
Let's talk a little bit about your Zionism as well, because in Hollywood, that's not actually often or always a popular opinion, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I try and make my identity as a Zionist, really, it's just a part of who I am. I have family there on all sides of the spectrum and both sides of all borders. And, it's been that way my whole life. My family made Aliyah really after the Yom Kippur War. So I didn't meet most of my cousins until I was 16. We're close. And obviously with technology now, it's so different than it was in the 70s and 80s when you really, my mom got to speak to her sister, my aunt, like maybe once a month or something. So it's so different now. But again, I run into a lot of people who don't know a lot about Israel, about the foundations of Israel, what it means, what the media can portray versus what it's actually like. I encourage people to go there because I think it's very different, to see it. And I think also there are people who whether in the industry or not, there are people who don't like Jews, and it kind of doesn't matter what your politics are, is what I've learned. Being a liberal Zionist doesn't matter more to certain people than being a conservative Zionist. If people don't believe that Jews have a right to an autonomous and free state in those borders, it really doesn't matter. And that's sad. And it's also, in some ways, makes me feel like I don't need to convince anyone. If your fundamental problem with me, whoever you are, is that I am Jewish, then it doesn't really matter for me to, try and engage in dialogue on Facebook, which is where a lot of these things and Twitter, are kind of getting played out. So, for me, I'm very clear that I don't have to agree with all the policies of this country that I live in or Israel, which I, consider my spiritual, historical homeland. There are many times that I'm very frustrated with things that go on. And I'm also very frustrated with the way it is presented, in the media. Both those things can be true. And I love Israel. I love visiting. I love seeing my family and being there. There are things that I enjoy doing there that you can't do anywhere else in the world. And I miss it. I miss it when I can't go, and look forward to going, God willing, soon.
So what do you miss? What are some of the things that you can only do in Israel?
Well, obviously I miss my family, and I have very religious family in many places throughout Israel, but we all try and, get together, as many of us as possible. And it's dozens of people. My cousins tend to have many children and their children have children, and many of my cousins' kids have married young and had children young. So I get to see my aunt. My aunt was, I think, a grandmother before she was 40, maybe right around 40. So I also get to see many generations of this family that I'm part of. So that's obviously something that happens very special in Israel. And, for me, I love walking around a country that feels so small, and that in a good way. I love the kind of the familiarness of even, taking a bus ride or being in a taxi. And I like that notion of, being in a real cultural melting pot. I love all the different kinds of people I get to see walking on the streets. And, I'm one of those people for whom, like, the falafel just tastes better in the old city, and like the air just smells sweeter in Tel Aviv. So, I'm that person. I love all the complexity and the strangeness, and I love all the different things you see. You see, Greek Orthodox priests walking, and you see, Druze soldiers, and you see Ethiopian soldiers, and it's also very different from, the Israel that I grew up in. It's changed so much. And I think that's also really beautiful. I do love Jerusalem stone. I love the look of Jerusalem in particular, and the feel of being in the old city it's very holy for me as a person of faith. It's a very, very, the hotel is always the most special place. No matter what is going on up top, it's still our hotel,
We'll be right back with more from Mayim Bialik after this short break. And we're back with Mayim Bialik, who has just added the credit filmmaker to her already impressive resume. Of course, we're here together to speak about your new film, which I watched, and I was not prepared for it. Actually, I should have done my homework, and I should have realized that it wasn't going to be funny and sitcom-y, which is your, shall we say, brand in a way. And I cried so many times and was touched so many times. No. It's called As They Made Us. And first of all, I just wondered, is this based off the morning blessing that women recite? Is there any connection to that?
No, that is so funny. I hadn't thought of that. No, there's a line in the film where the main character, Abigail, says to her brother, you're as sick as I am. You're as sick as they made us. So that's actually what it comes from, is that we are a product both of how our parents literally make us, like our DNA, and also how they make us by how they behave and what we interact with. I had not thought of that in terms of the Bircha Shachar. That's interesting, though.
Interesting. Okay, so I don't want to spoiler, so why don't you explain what the film is as much as you would like to explain?
Yeah, the film centers around this character played by Dianna Agron, a woman who is divorced and kind of managing two kids and an ex-husband that she's cordial with, but she has two very complicated parents, and that's played by Dustin Hoffman and Candice Bergen. And she's very involved in their life. She's very involved in taking care of them, which I think resonates with a lot of people, especially depending on your ethnic or cultural background. It often does fall on the daughter. And historically, that's how it's been for, a lot of time. And in almost every family that I speak to, there's like the one that doesn't speak to this one, or the one who left and we don't know why. And so in this movie, Simon Helberg from Big Bang Theory plays this estranged brother who is kind of called on to come back to the family as their father is dying. And that's sort of the structure of the film. It's not high concept, as they say. There's not controversy. It's about people interacting in complicated and, yes, sometimes funny ways. And ultimately, it is a deeply emotional story of, kind of a family that in some ways has fallen apart and in some ways is still together. And it was the first screenplay I've written. I directed it. I had a really phenomenal director of photography, David Feeney-Mosier, who I give credit to. And I consider it our kind of combined vision. But yeah, that is this movie. And my father of blessed memory died 7 years ago. And I wrote this film after my year of Kaddish. So it was part of that kind of cathartic process.
I lost my mother to cancer around the same time that you lost your father, maybe slightly earlier.
Wow.
And I think perhaps because of that, it hit me so hard. But it's just an emotional film to begin with. And even the very choice of Dustin Hoffman and Candice Bergen was so interesting how it affected me, because these are people I grew up with in a way, right? Very,
right.
Very far away. And now they're, old. And old isn't a bad word or a judgy word. They are old. They are, objectively old. And of course, Dustin Hoffman, who plays the father, is not looking as great as he looked on your podcast recording.
Well, he let us age him. He actually looks remarkably youthful. And also Candace, I mean, she's stunning. She's absolutely stunning. And she's stunning in a very mature and graceful, beautiful way. So, but I absolutely resonate with that making a film with people that so many of us knew in their youth, and knew for roles that they did, when they were, let's say, my age, it was very, very powerful. And I think definitely added to a lot of the emotion around it for us, even on the crew.
And I hope it's not a spoiler to say that there's some flashback scenes and then spliced with
Yes.
real life. And what was so interesting to me, we are the same age, right? So just the very color scheme that you use in these flashback scenes just remind me of old photo album colors.
Yeah, that was intentional. My production designer, Jordan Henderson, that was something she and David and I worked on together. We wanted, the present day is very kind of cool and very kind of blue and gray, and there's a very specific kind of look in terms of we didn't want it to be distracting. It's very kind of almost monochromatic, and at least in that selection of hues. And then yes, the flashbacks are that kind of amber hue of many photos of the 70s and early 80s. And yes, there's also a graininess so that the flashbacks, also look and feel a little bit different. And the idea was not that she's a first time filmmaker, she didn't know how to tell a story, so she had to tell it in flashback. The idea is that, it's a movie about memory and how pervasive, the experiences we had as a child are. And that we're kind of constantly in this process of remembering and forgetting. And obviously, even two children growing up in the same house can have a very different perspective. It's also a very Jewish movie, I should say that. We do show a lot of, more traditional things, and the Shema kind of runs throughout. And Candice Bergen, who is not Jewish, she actually knows a lot of Yiddish. She ad-libbed some of her Yiddish in the film. Dianna Agron, who's a very accomplished singer, she sings in Yiddish in the film as well. One of the lullabies that my grandfather used to sing to me. So yeah, there's a lot surrounding the role of the Shema, kind of throughout. And I didn't do it in any way to be like, this is a movie about a Jewish family. It's just I wrote it about aspects of this family's experience in mourning, in grief, and in death. That I feel Judaism really can be very supportive in, and I got a lot out of especially the halachic structure, surrounding grief and mourning.
It's true that the Judaism in the film is presented by the way, meaning just along the way, they happen to have a Chanukiah, a menorah on a shelf, and there's a little, Magen David, a Star of David, tacked to the door, things like that. Things that I would assume are very recognizable in North America to everyone, not just Jews, but it could have been as easily some kind of Italian family or some other ethnicity, it felt like to me at the same time. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, they also could have been Italian Jews, which would be, another
even
layer of complexity. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think, people who come from, let's say, an ethnic family would maybe understand a lot of the dynamics in particular, but I've also spoken to people who don't come from any sort of ethnic family, but just come from a family where there's intensity emotionally. And that's a lot of families. And that's kind of what I've heard also. But for sure, there are things that are, particular to a certain kind of family structure, for sure.
The arguing between Dustin Hoffman's character and Candice, but I just heard my grandparents, Lou Leonard, this, New York, where right. It was so visceral. It was just there. Amazing. Just
Thank you.
Great capture. Now, there are a couple scenes I don't want to spoil, but there's a lot of anger, unresolved anger that becomes more faded as the photo albums in the 1970s albums kind of fade out, those colors fade out. And I wonder if that was a fair treatment of these unresolved anger issues. You have a lot of conflict between all of the members in the family. And some of it seemed to me, I don't know, kind of swept under the rug and just forgiven. I don't know if that's fair.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, there's a lot of subjectivity, obviously, and people, I've heard all different kind of reactions, to how we deal with, in particular, like how the film deals with violence, and I think that, part of the complexity that I wanted to show was a lot of that uncertainty about how you function. And, this was a movie about, a woman, kind of in that sandwich generation of taking care of her parents, with all of the memory and pain in many cases that is involved with, and also trying to function in her present life, with her own children and her own mental health and her own things. So, I intentionally did not write a movie where we actively resolve all those issues, because in many cases they cannot be resolved. What I wanted to show is that sometimes people that hurt you also love you very much. And people who hurt are often hurt themselves in the first place. So I did not intend for the film also to be about forgiveness per se. And I think that's also something that, can make a lot of people uncomfortable. There was one review in particular where the reviewer said, like, I don't want to deal with these people and these feelings. And why would anyone want to interact with these people? And that's exactly the point. Many people would not want to interact with these people, and many people can and do. And so I really wanted to show also that there's strength and growth, that can come from being able to reconcile things that were painful with things that also you do feel that you can, without harming yourself, still have a responsibility to. And I think that's what I wanted to show with Abigail. We don't know all the conversations that went on. We don't know all the things in between. And sometimes in life you don't. And in some cases, those conversations don't happen. But I intentionally left it a little bit open for people to decide to fill in the blanks of what happens in between.
Because I am a Jewish media journalist, as is Abigail, the the modern Jew. I mean, come on, that's just the perfect name for some kind of outlet. I'm sure it will come out at some point, but yes, and a mother, and dealing with the work-life balance, and having parents, and having gone through the whole sickness thing. I get it, and I identified with her so much, but she was so, I don't know, too good to be true in so many ways until, and I'm not going to go any further with that, Yeah. And Kol hakavod, good job getting those scenes in too, because
thank you.
Otherwise I would be like, I just hate you because you're beautiful to begin with. I mean, the actress is just gorgeous, of course, right?
She is, and and also she did it's a very difficult role, to play. She had to go through so many complicated emotions, and she actually did an episode of my podcast where she talks about her father has a progressive illness, and so she has been dealing with a lot of these things since she was very young. So it was really a real work of love, for her as well to work through some of this, and I think she did a really, really stunning job.
Definitely, no question. And the last name Agron, I would assume she has some kind of tie to Gershom Agron, another literary figure. And
it's funny. I never asked her about that. She is Jewish. I think originally it was Agronsky, and then it was shortened to Agron. But I'll have to text her and find out. Yes.
Now, I also want to ask just about the idea of pride in Judaism, because we have all this pride and the respect, and Dustin Hoffman especially was very keyed up on, you're not respecting, all this kind of stuff. And that definitely, as it echoed the experience in my Jewish family, my Jewish American family. And I wonder if that is something that you think is universal enough to put out there, or is it more particular?
I don't know. I think it depends, I grew up in that kind of home. My grandparents were immigrants, so I grew up with first generation Americans who, my dad was pretty Americanized. My mom, much less so. She didn't speak English in her home. And my grandparents, they never drove. They didn't have, they worked in sweatshops, and, they were a very different kind of American experience. But that notion, I think, resonates for a lot of people, if not of my generation, the one before. My parents did raise me kind of very old fashioned. So for me, that was a big component, and one that, is very true to a lot of experience I know about. And then again, it's not without love. It's just, we all do the best we can. And I see that as a parent myself.
Now, something that was very modern and didn't raise an eyebrow, I thought, was the main character, Abigail, is really taken with her landscaper, who is, I would assume, not Jewish in any kind of way, just looking at his lineage, shall we say. And yet that goes without any kind of comment in this very Jewish family. Was that intentional?
I think that I'm trying to think. Yeah, I guess it was intentional. Justin Chukari is the actor you're talking about. And it's funny, I did date a non-Jew after my divorce. And of course it was spoken about. But yeah, I guess, there's also so many things to cover in a movie. And I think there's a lot of also, misunderstanding about, Jews marrying out, and it's a lot of complexity, I guess, that didn't feel like it needed to have its place in this film. But I don't portray her as an observant person, she obviously has a lot of Judaism in her life. But yeah, I guess I didn't make an issue of that.
The writer at The Modern Jew dating, non-Jewish landscaper, next headline, right?
That's right.
One thing I noticed as well, and I don't know if it was intentional or just coincidental, and we can end on this because I'm taking up much of your time, is the female actors are taller than the male actors. Was that on purpose?
I didn't even notice. No, I mean, it just happens sometimes. No, I hadn't even thought about it. Dianna she's tallish. So, and Candace obviously is also a tall woman. I literally hadn't even thought about it. I should mention the actress who plays Nathan's girlfriend and then wife in the movie is actually an Israeli actress. And I believe she's, we had her in low shoes, but she was not an exceptionally tall woman. Her name was Michal. And anyway, she's from Bnei Brak, I believe, which was very exciting to have an Israeli with us. But yeah, I literally had not noticed. Yeah, in real life, all the women in my family are shorter than the men, but the men are not very tall either.
Maybe it's your inner feminist just making it, just
giving them that edge.
That little edge, right? Yeah. And we women, we definitely deserve it, right? So Mayim, it is Mother's Day at the end of this week. Do you have any kind of Mother's Day wisdom that you want to throw out just to end our little conversation?
There's a lot of expectation, especially here in America, about Mother's Day. And, I grew up where we, got there early to some restaurant where you had to wait for 2 hours and everybody was grumpy and hungry. I decided when I became a mother to not have any pressure on the day at all. And it's been very, very pleasant. I usually will do something, we'll do something with my mom, kind of what she wants to do, but often the day before. So that on the day of, I really like to sleep, organize the kitchen, clean the pantry, do something just that makes me feel good about the house being more in order. And I like to be left alone for the most part. But we took my mother to a Jane Austen improv play. And it was outdoors, which was perfect because of the COVID of it. And we all wore ridiculous looking sun hats and she loved it. So we did that a week early and that felt appropriate.
That sounds brilliant. I wish I could do that one day. And so now I have a new thing on my bucket list. Beautiful. Mayim, thank you so much. Really a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Times Will Tell from the Times of Israel. And thanks to our producer, Gilad Brownstein.
Please subscribe wherever you find your podcasts and check out our daily briefing news show every Sunday through Thursday.
Like what you hear? Consider rating us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to spread the word.
Until next week.
Shalom.